We were there approximately November 1st to 15th. We had originally planned to get on the air on November 2nd, but you'll see it took us a few days longer to get on the air. We left about the 30th of October. It was a 45-hour journey, 4 flights, Seattle to San Francisco to Hawaii to Guam, an overnight in Guam, and finally to Palau. And we were pretty tired when we got there, and we faced a lot of challenges, which you will be interested to hear about tonight. So here's a map of Palau. On the left, this little black box is the state of Koror, which we were originally going to stay in, which I talked about in September. It's about 340 plus islands in this little country. 70% of the landmass is in this big island that you see above Koror, and this island is Babeldaob. And that's where we actually ended up. And you will hear the story of how that came about. Middle is Australia down here, and you can see Papua New Guinea, and we're somewhere up there in that little square west of the Philippines and north of Australia and Papua New Guinea. You can see the United States up here, about 30 to 40 degrees, and we got a shot of Europe here going the other direction. Far right is our azimuthal map. We're in Palau here. We're listed at the center of the world, and you can see the US takeoff and Europe, with South America being our antipode. I'm going to talk about the team. We had a team of 5. This is Jack and 7JP. Jack is here tonight, and you will be hearing him talk. He will be talking about antennas and generators, and I don't know how we'd have gotten through all this without his skills with all of those. He is from Whidbey Island and a firefighter. And this is Brian, N9ADG. Brian is a MIT brilliant man who was in charge of our logging and our networking, and had an unfortunate family emergency just hours before we had to leave, and he had to stay behind. However, we had the ability to allow him to log in remotely, so he made a lot of FT8 contacts for us and monitored everything that we needed monitoring. So he was a really important part of the team, even though he wasn't physically present. Some of you might remember Rob in 7QT. He's our very experienced DXpeditioner with 20 plus DXpeditions under his belt. Without him, none of us would have gone. This would not have happened, but he had a great idea to take a bunch of newbies. Now, Brian has been on one with Rob before, but the rest of us, this was our first time. Rob is the guy you want when you need to get things done. He knows everybody. He's great at making contacts, and he can get us resources, make a phone call to DX Engineering, get a piece of equipment shipped over on an emergency basis. Very good person to know. And here I am. As some of you know, I have a CPA background. I ended up being the business manager, financial and logistics person for the team. And Justin is not here tonight, but you will be hearing from him because he is very prominent on our videos. He was our videographer, and he did just an amazing job. So that is the team, and 5 of us on the team, 4 of us went, but 5 of us were very active on making this happen. I'm going to turn this over next to Rob.
Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. As with all expeditions, it starts off with the planning phase, if you wish. The first question is where are we going? And with that, we typically look into club logs most wanted, determine a place that the team is interested in going, and that it's, we can find, get a call sign and find a location to operate from. Obviously, we've got to pick a team, as Robin mentioned. It was just an idea of sort of going on an expedition that would allow folks an opportunity to experience, a trip like this. Robin, I think, there we go. Thank you. So that's what we ended up doing. We found, there's a bunch of us in the Western Washington DX Club that decided to try our hand at a new expedition to Palau. Once we picked a place to operate from, which was Caroline's Resort, as you'll see coming up, we analyzed the terrain using Google Maps, Google Earth, and to determine what antennas we were going to take, how much room did we have to set up antennas. And so that then leads to the next topic, which is, antenna choices. And in this case, we were on top of a very tall hill, very close to the capital city. And so we basically made our selections of bringing several Yagis and then verticals for the lower bands. We pooled our resources together. We had a bunch of K3Ss available. I had several amps, so did Robin and Brian as well. So we basically brought what we had, 2 kilowatt amplifiers as well as a KPA 500. With only 5 of us going, we decided to bring 2 stations and operate that 24/7, with the third station being the spare. Once we've decided all the stuff that we were bringing, we had to get it there. And that's where logistics comes into play. We were having difficulty trying to find a company that would deal with us as individuals. Robin succeeded in finding a company called CTSI Logistics, who basically shipped our equipment from Long Beach to Palau, and the equipment is now on its way back. We expect it back towards the end of March. One of our team members drove a U-Haul with 1,800 pounds of gear in the U-Haul trailer down to Long Beach and delivered it to CTSI. This is one of the reasons we chose Palau. It had never been activated on 60 meters. It also, if you take a look at it, it was fairly high up in the rankings for 80 meters worldwide, number 48. 10 meters was also needed. And with the sunspot cycles being as high as it is, we decided that this would be a great place to go. And several of our compatriots on the East Coast needed it as well, so that was a big help. And also, it was it took an important role in World War II. And I, being sort of a history buff and a diver, was thinking that I'd head to Palau and maybe get some dives in, as well as seeing some World War II historical remnants. And really, it's important to determine what the team goals are. It's so funny that I've been on expeditions where every member had different goals, and you could see that being problematic. So one of the most important things for me with a group of new DXpeditioners, my primary goal for all of them was to keep it fun. We were going to, we came up with an operating schedule, but if folks were too tired, nobody was going to push the team. If folks wanted to operate, great. Otherwise, no big deal. Get enough sleep. And really, one of our goals was just to keep 2 to 3 stations on the air 24/7, and then work as many of you as possible. So here's an image of a picture of the Carolines. As you can see, the resort to the left with sort of the rusty colored tin roof was going to be our operating location. Looking straight into the picture from that bungalow, straight out north, if you wish, was the U.S. So it was really technically northeast. And then to the left of the page, directly left, was Europe. And we decided, based off of this location, we could fit the following antennas up on top of the hill. We picked one fairly large 80-foot, 160 meter vertical. We brought two K4 KIO hex beams, essentially two-element Yagis. We were thinking that if North America was open, we could point both Yagis at North America, and vice versa with Europe. So they were sort of freestanding Manstrom sort of directional turning. Those were our rotators, was by hand. I mentioned the 2 kilowatt amplifiers and the 1 500-watt amplifier. We brought these high-powered filters, the 4 Oscar 3 Alpha high-pass filters, which basically did band filtering right after the amps to prevent interstation interference. And then again, we had our K3. I called them on September 21st to extend our stay by a day ahead and a day at the end of the expedition, because we had bought our tickets in May. And United Airlines every couple of weeks would say, hey, your flights have changed, your flights have changed. And when I called the Carolines on the 21st, a month before leaving, they basically told me that they had canceled our reservation unbeknownst to us. So we were basically scrambling for a plan B.
And we did find a plan B. We were aware that there was a DXpedition following ours to Babeldaub Island, that large land mass north of Karor. And Rob knew Al Roviner, who was going to participate in the International CW contest from this location that you see, which is the Troll Village Community Center, which is a typhoon shelter, and it's also known as a BAI. It is controlled by a high chief who is sort of the cultural head of each state. And Rob reached out and we got a little information. I did some research and found the M&A resort nearby and found us reservations so we could go there. And it turned out the proprietor was the island power broker who was able to communicate with the high chief on our behalf to get it rented. And as you can see, it's got a lovely view of the water, and it's up on a higher hill with plenty of space for antennas. It had air conditioning, mains, 240. It had water, toilets. It had everything we needed, plus knowing that typhoons come through. It's a typhoon shelter, so I didn't think it could be better. Plus, there were none of those saltwater crocodiles around that, we had been warned about. This is a photo of the resort beach. It's a private beach on the top that we had, and down below is the beach with the resort, which really was just a private family outfit with a few bungalows. But up here where the red circle is where the typhoon shelter was. It's really only a mile away. It was really going to be a great setup. But
when we, after we booked the M&A, I started looking at some videos on YouTube of expeditions that had gone to the BAI and operated from the BAI. And there was one video in particular where the gentleman tunes down to 160 meters and all he heard was S9 plus noise, which got me a little concerned. I found another YouTube video from a Japanese DXpeditioner who was operating from the BAI. He was on a different band, also experiencing a bunch of noise, S9 plus. So I got in contact with Gary Shirk, Tango 88 Sugar Sugar, and basically asked him if he could stop by. He had just a shortwave radio receiver, and I just asked him to go up and see if he could, sniff out the ham bands on his shortwave receiver and kind of report back. Well, Gary reports back that basically from 40 meters on down, it's S9 plus noise. At this point, Gary suggests we ship him an MFJ, essentially an ultrasonic noise finding device, to see if we could identify the transformers or the insulators that were generating the noise. We assumed it was coming from the power lines. I made a call to DX Engineering. They were just incredible. They shipped this device next day, FedEx, to Gary at no cost to us. And Gary then got in contact. He knew the lead engineer of the power company. And Gary promptly handed this off to the engineer, and they went out and did some preliminary investigation, but could not find the culprit on the power lines. So we knew going in that they hadn't solved the noise problem. And the QSL card, that Gary's QSL card, is right down below. And so the early of the morning, we arrived November 1st, early in the morning, November 2nd, Justin and I headed up to the buy. Justin had brought his a magnetic loop antenna, just a loop antenna with his SDR radio, and we were sort of using that to try and find the source of the noise and just trying to categorize how bad it was. And indeed, it was pretty bad across most of the amateur bands. Later that morning, the power company comes in, shows up, and we work with them going up and down the street to see if we could find the offending transformer. It did not appear to be coming from the power lines. It indeed looked like it was coming in from the noise source was the telco company and their DSL lines. It appears that none of the lines were grounded or shielded, and it became very apparent there was nothing we were going to be able to do about it. While we're out sniffing for RFI, the CTSI delivered our equipment to the buy. The two gentlemen on the right basically delivered our 32 bins, I believe, 32 or 33 bins to us on the back of the flatbed truck. The image to the left is all of our equipment being delivered to CTSI in Los Angeles, months prior. So we decided to just go ahead and set up our Hex Beam, just one of them, to test what the conditions were like. And we got this done probably, at about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We had the station set up and the Hex Beam installed. And there, Justin and I were listening to the noise on the radio. And in essence, every single amateur radio band had S9 plus noise on it. So at that point, late in the afternoon, we decided to set up one of our antennas, the big IR, down at the M&A bungalows. It seemed like the noise was a lot less, but we still picked up some noise. So there, Justin and I were setting up the antenna down at the M&A, while Robin and Jack were packing up at the buy because we realized the buy was not usable. Here's a little short video clip of the noise.
So at that point, our goals had changed. A day is passing. We have no place to set up or operate. So now the sole focus is to find a low noise QTH. We realized that this was going to be somewhat of a race. We were losing time. We needed to just function as best we could with as little sleep as we could. And now it was just never give up. McKinley and Arlene are the power brokers on Babeldaub Island. He is a native. She comes over from Guam, married him. They own the M&A Bungalows, which is a family-built operation from trees that they grew, that McKinley planted with his grandfather. The trees grew up, and then they cut them down and built these beautiful bungalows. Arlene is an amazing businesswoman, and between the two of them, they were the key for us finding a place to operate, gathering the equipment that we needed. You have to remember, we thought we were going to be in a inside place with power and toilets and running water. So Arlene took us around the next day, maybe starting that day and the next day, to several sites to see if we could find something that would work. So site number one was the Typhoon Shelter. That didn't work. The M&A Beach Bungalows was just as noisy. They offered their construction grounds. That did not look like it was going to be very ideal. Number four, the Urum Dock and Pier, turned out to be probably our favorite place. You'll see it in the next slide. And we almost could have had it, but for she did take us to a few cemeteries, to a public pier, and we did get to go to the World War II Japanese lighthouse, which is somewhat of a tourist attraction on the far north of the island. But I'll bring you down to number 9 in red. This is where we ended up. And if you look at this inset picture to the right, it is a picture of one of the most important archaeological features of the southern Micronesia. It is similar to the stone monoliths of Easter Island. And the spot we ended up with, which you will see soon, overlooked that site, and it's a much larger site than what you see, but it's a public place of archaeological significance, and it was really magnificent.
So this was our first choice. It was a location that offered essentially a spit that went out several hundred feet into the ocean, and was just perfect. It was about 2 to 3 acres in size. It had a picnic shelter, fairly large picnic shelter with power, as well as bathrooms. And so this was our first choice. Great takeoff angles to North America and Europe, over saltwater in almost every direction. Arlene made a few phone calls to the city government, and it turns out that they were going to have a ribbon cutting ceremony right in the middle of our expedition, and they wanted us gone a day prior, as well as the day of. And knowing how much work is involved in putting up antennas and taking down antennas, we just decided this site was not going to work for us. And therefore we settled on the other site that Robin talked about, the archaeological site. So first of all, we go survey it. There are 2 picnic shelters, no bathrooms, no running water. It's about just a little over a half a mile, I would say, from the main road and power lines. Hence, the noise levels were very low. Looking straight into this picture where you see the ocean in the distance is North America. So it was a great location for our Yagis, 450 feet high, sloping down to the ocean. And Europe is essentially 90 degrees off to the left. The shelter on the left is where we decided to set up our operating QTH, if you wish, and the shelter on the right was where we stored our stuff. But the first problem that we had to deal with was trying to get permission to operate from essentially a public location where folks had to come in and pay to use, to see the stone monoliths down below. So the next thing I had to do was I had to meet with the governor. So our lean mate set up an appointment. I went into the governor's office, sat down and started to explain to him what amateur radio is about and why I needed to operate out of a national monument site. And I was met with some skepticism and some frowns, at which point I decided to mention that we got our license from a guy named Jonathan Tamul, at which point he sort of smiled and he goes, Jonathan? And I said, yes, here's his cell phone number. He said if I needed any sort of help, that he would be available. And so the governor basically picked up his phone, dialed Jonathan's number that I provided. It turns out that they were the best of friends. Again, as Robin said, everything on this island is a network of connections, and that's how things get done. So after he spoke with Jonathan, the governor gave us our permission to operate from there for a small fee, a daily fee, and we shook hands, and that was pretty much it.
And now you'll hear from Jack.
So finally, 2 days later than what we were planning for, we finally had a place to start setting up our antennas and our radios, but it created some logistical issues. All of our equipment was down at the Bay, which is about 4.5, 5 miles away from where this location was at. And we had a rental van, but it would have taken us a full day running back and forth with the Bay to get our equipment up here. And so Arlene and McKinley came through again, and McKinley had his crew go to the Bay first thing in the morning with their flatbed truck, and then they trucked all of our equipment up here and packed it into that shelter that Rob was showing on the right. And so we were able to start setting up our antennas, and we started with our Hex Beams, putting them together. We also had to start worrying about how we're going to power everything, and that actually started back on the 3rd when we knew we were going to go to a remote location that we needed some kind of power source, and Arlene was already working on that for us. So on the day of the 4th, we had a generator coming thanks to the phone efforts of Arlene and McKinley's work. Next one. So this is a short video of showing us setting up our antennas, and the first one that went up was one of the K4 KIOs. And the reason it was the first one is we were taking it through the area where we're going to be putting up one of the verticals, where we're going to have 32 ground radials, guy lines in the way. So we had to get this antenna up first. We put it right off the back corner of our operating shack. And it takes, the Hex Beam itself is not all that heavy. One person can actually carry it around, but putting it up in the air on the pole it was on, which is a 33-foot spider beam aluminum pole, it takes at least 3 people, 2 to push it up, 1 to run the wrench to tighten down the clamps. But it's a very secure system, and we used these devices called ground grabbers to anchor the quad pod down as well as the guying. Our next antenna that went up was one of the big IRs. This is Justin and Robin putting that up. The other kid there in the hat, white pants, his name's Mamoon. He was a big asset to our efforts here at this site. He worked for the construction company. We ended up hiring him for the duration of our stay. He came out every day for 4 to 6 hours. He did a lot of work for us. He laid out ground radials for us, as well as helping put up antennas. And then the last antenna we put up on the hill was our antenna for 160. This was actually a few days later, but we're just going to show you the process of getting it up in the air. And it was a 26-meter spider beam fiberglass pole with a vertical wire and then a capacitance hat on top with four lines that came off of it. And this was a bit of a chore to get up in the air. And as Justin would say, it was like pushing up a wet spaghetti noodle into the air. And so we put it up. We had 6 of us doing it, and it was a little bit of effort because the 2 guys running around had to keep the guys tensioned. And after everything was all set up, Justin had a really nice day, got his drone out and flew over the site to give us a really good aerial view of what we had for a setup. Next. So looking at this picture here, if you look at the picture on the right, that's a topographical view of where we were at. So we had a great sloping conditions going down to the ocean for North America. And then we just had to shoot over the top of the hills going towards Europe. But both, it was clear shots to both directions. We were able to use our Hex beams, both turned to either Europe or North America, depending on what was going on. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see our operating shelter on the right. As Rob pointed out, our storage was on the left. But we have a Hex beam off the back corner, off the corner of the operating shelter, as well as in front of the equipment storage. The big IR is down below on the hill. And then up on top, we had our 160. The one antenna that's not depicted in this picture was a DHDL that we put up off in the jungle there. And we were hoping that was going to help improve our reception with our noise issues on 80 and 160. It turned out just to be an exercise of putting up the antenna in a jungle environment with mosquitoes and ants, and then dragging coax, trying to get coax through the jungle back to our operating shack. Next. So as far as our station layout, Rob already mentioned we had K3s were our radio of choice. So all three stations had the same exact radio, so the operators didn't have to learn different radios. Each radio had its own laptop. We brought 3 amplifiers with us. As Rob mentioned, we had 2 that were 1.2 or better kW, and then Robin's KPA 500. We put that on station 3. We set the tables up. We had station 1 and 2 along one side, then the spare station was held off in the back corner. It's just the way we were able to lay it out. In that bottom picture there, you see our high power bandpass filters. And if you notice the yellow stickers on all the filters, they were labeled for the band as well as the antenna input and the station input. And this was highly important because as you're switching bands, you needed to make sure you were using the correct antenna into the correct station on the correct band. So everything was very well labeled. All the feed lines coming from the antennas were marked with which antenna they belonged to. All the station cables were marked with which station they came from. In addition to, all of the stations had labels on the back of the table so you could sit at the bandpass filters and actually turn and look at the table and make sure you had the correct cable in your hand for the correct station you wanted to change. And it worked out very well. But every time you wanted to change bands, you had to go through this process of unplugging from one bandpass filter into the other one and make sure you're using the correct antenna. Next. So as I said, we had to, we were going from a site, as Robin mentioned, we were going from a site that was indoors, air conditioned. We had power, we had indoor plumbing, to a field day site where we had no power, we had no bathrooms, no running water. And we were able to rent, thanks to Arlene, a 6,500 watt diesel generator. So they brought that out the afternoon of the 4th for us. We were able to get that set up. We had to make sure we wired everything going into our operating shack. Most of our stuff could operate off of 220. We had to do a little creative wiring because we did have some 110 that we needed to use. So we had to do a little creative wiring off the generator to make that happen. But one of the things we realized very quickly with the generator is that a 5-gallon can of diesel was not going to cut it for us. Our refueling, the number of times we had to refuel, we would need 3 or 4 of those cans on site, and then we'd have to make a run to the gas station to get diesel on a daily basis. And we found out, one, that at that time, diesel wasn't available on the north end of the island where we were at. In addition to, the stores, when they did have diesel, were not open on Sundays. So that created an issue that I was concerned about, not having enough diesel on site. So thanks to Arlene, we were able to actually buy a 55-gallon drum of diesel, which they delivered to us the next day. Fortunately for us, we had shipped a funnel that had a filter system in it to filter out water and particulates. And if you look in the picture on the right, you'll see the dark line in the hose. That's not a shadow. That's the color of the diesel fuel. If you've ever bought diesel fuel in a barrel in the South Pacific, I'm told this is what it looks like every single time. Very nasty looking diesel. And when it would splash out of the funnel, there would be black flakes across the top of the generator. So if it was here, I would not even put it in my equipment, but they're used to using that down there. Next.
So one of the things that happened when we arrived, we checked out all the noise, 80, 160, all of the low bands seemed to be it seemed like a great location. We were extremely disappointed when we showed up to find S9 plus noise on 80 meters, 60 meters, as well as 160, essentially unusable. And the picture on the right is 80 meters, and take a look at the noise going across the entire ham band. And it starts, at 3.50, clear up the top of the band. And I think we've got, do we have a video on this, or there we go. Can you guys? And that's exactly what we heard. Just horrible noise. It turns out it's over the horizon radar. And it appears that the Chinese or the Russians were basically just taking over the ham bands and just wiping them out. So I'm afraid from that area of the world, the low bands are unusable with the exception of FT8. So if you're going to work low bands in the South Pacific, at least from that part of the world, you're going to have to do it using FT8.
So on November 4th, we finally got on the air, and you can see the green mosquito netting that we had to put up, but it was just fantastic to finally be on the air. I had a day and a half of operating. My first 2 sessions were SSB and then a little bit of CW. And the overnights were just fabulous, taking the overnight shift. I wanted this picture in because I really loved the feeling of watching the sunset and the sunrise over the Pacific. And it was just a great feeling until November 6th, when I became symptomatic and tested positive for COVID. That meant I had to isolate myself in the bungalow, protect the team for me, no more team meals, no more operating. It was, kind of sad. And we were down to 3 operators. And so the guys on the ground just had to take it away. I was able to return on the 10th to close it out and have some really good fun. But those 4 days were not my favorite.
And on November 7th, we got a visit from Gary. And Gary helped us. He was our boots on the ground. He brought us a ton of donuts, I think a dozen donuts for the 4 of us. And there's a picture of the 3 of us and Gary. Gary basically has an illustrious career, worked many years with Voice of America. He's working for a nonprofit radio station on Palau, and he says he's going to work a few more years. But it was great meeting him. Anyway, we have a picture of him. The 160. It took us a while to install the 160 just because we had a lot of high winds. There's the picture of it. It was at the highest point of our camp. It's got 4 top-loaded radials with a spiral coming down the poles. So as we were pushing it up, we had to sort of do a helix of the vertical section all the way down. But it was a perfect 1-to-1 on 18.40 18.40, the FT8 frequencies. So Justin did a great job on the match.
And Jack can speak to the coconuts.
So one of the great things about working or operating in the South Pacific in the jungle is fresh coconuts. And the picture on the left there, this is Mamoon. Again, he was a great asset to our efforts to make this expedition happen. And one day he went out, disappeared off into the jungle, and he came back carrying this stick with, 6, 8 coconuts on there, and taught us how to actually select the coconuts from the trees to figure out which ones to knock down, and then how to open them up and enjoy fresh coconut milk, as you see in the picture there on the right that Justin and I were enjoying during our operating session in Palau. And a beautiful day. It was just a lot of fun that particular day.
Until?
So on November 9th, Rob had done the overnight shift. Justin had went up to the encampment early to relieve him. And Rob returned to the bungalows, and I got in the car with Justin's breakfast and went up to our operating location. And as I got there, I noticed off in the distance, it was looking pretty dark. And so I asked Justin when I got down to the camp, I said, had you been watching that? And he had, but he was also in the throes of operating, working pileups. So his focus was more on what's going on the radio. And we have a video here. If you didn't follow us on Twitter, and I'm going to let Justin narrate this.
A little breezy.
Makes me real serious. Yeah, side dives.
This is one of the first days. This was just a normal squall coming through. Anybody that's done field day in the Pacific Northwest knows what that rain's kind of about.
Well, we lost the walls, but we're holding on to the radios. Well, we just had a massive squall take out the walls. So we got everything covered as best as we can, and we just got to wait it out. Antennas are still up at the moment, but that's pretty serious. Storm's slowing down a little bit. Hopefully it keeps slowing down. It's really bad. We haven't lost any of the antennas yet, but the 160 is barely hanging on. We just cinched up everything on the guys. The beams were leaning over quite a bit, and we lost all our walls. Trying to pack up the stations to keep them as dry as possible. Wind slowing down, rain slowing down a little bit. We'll be back.
I'd like to point out one thing, Jack, before you speak again, that Justin was unable to even pull out his camera during the height of the storm. You two were just absolutely hanging on for dear life. Trying to keep the equipment covered. So what you saw was after the big part of the storm had passed. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. So Justin and I, we broke down all the stations. We've loaded everything into bins. We didn't care what went into what bins. We just wanted to get it covered and protect as much as possible. And we took it all back down to the resort, and we were the only guests at the resort at the time, so they allowed us to take over their dining room area. So we were able to lay out all of our equipment on the tables to try to dry it out. So we opened up all our K3s to inspect for any potential water damage and get them aired out, lay things out on the table to dry them out. One of the things that kind of hampered our efforts in drying out is because of this storm, the resort had several power outages during the day. It would beyond, and then we'd go out. And so that kind of hampered our us getting the equipment dried out. But one of the things that we were able to do was to reorganize our stations on tables so that we were able to return. We boxed everything up as stations so that it reduced the amount of time we had to spend getting equipment back on the air. Next.
All right, we're back after the storm. It's like everything for the most part is still vertical. Winds have died out. You can actually see the reef again. Chickens and birds are here. 160 is still up. Still has all its pieces. That's good. Get it straightened out. Beams are still up. Just a vertical stepper's still up. Mahmoud's got the tarps back up, it looks like. So getting better. He's been working hard since we've been gone. All right, man, good work. This is the state of things as we left it. All right, get cleaned up, get back on the air.
All right, so one of the things that occurred the evening of the 9th is we had a phone call from Arlene, who said there was a problem with the generator we had rented, and they were going to be sending out a mechanic early in the morning on the 10th to take a look at it and hopefully get it fixed. So we've got a short video here showing our quote unquote mechanic working on the generator. And I'll warn you now, you may want to have yourself ready to turn down your volume because this video can be loud. So go ahead, Robin, and play the video. So that is a diesel generator, not a gas generator. And I don't think my weed eaters I have here at the house rev as high as that mechanic got those generators to run. So unfortunately, it was determined that that generator was not going to be of use to us any further for this expedition. So now we're back to having an issue needing to power our stations. Fortunately, we had shipped a 3,000 watt gas powered generator with the intention of being at Carolyn's and using that generator to power one of our amplifiers. But that was not going to be enough power to operate one full station, let alone two. Fortunately, McKinley did have another generator available to bring to us, but unfortunately it was half the power. It was a 3,000 watt diesel generator, in addition to the problem of it was only capable of doing 120. So we went from a 6,500 watt generator for 220 down to a 3,000 watt generator only capable of 120. So now we had to reconfigure all of our wiring for our operating shack. We were able to run the flex amplifier with the 3,000 watt generator we brought that was capable of 220. And then we had to wire everything else up to run on 110 off the other generator. We had planned to use Robin's KPA 500. When we brought it back to camp and set it up, we hit the power button, the light came on, but there was nobody home in the amplifier. That's all we were able to do was get the light to come on. So we had an issue with that amplifier. We had to box it back up. Fortunately, the other generator or the other amplifier we brought with us was a Gemini DX 1200 that was configured for 220, but is able to be set for 110, but it required us taking out 42 screws out of the chassis, a 5-second change of a fuse, and then 42 screws to go back into the chassis. But we were able to make that work. Additional problems this brought is we had one generator running on diesel, the other one running on gasoline. So we had to make sure we didn't get our fuel sources mixed up. And we only had one filter to filter fuel. We were already using that with the diesel generator. Next. Is this still me?
And that's Rob.
This is me. Thank you. So this is our first activation ever from Palau. And for those of you that are familiar with FT8, everything in red is folks that are calling you. And as you can see, the entire band was filled with callers. I think we ended up with almost 400 QSOs on 60 meters that evening. I think we ran 2 nights on 60 meters. But it took us several days to get better weather before we could repair the 160 meter antenna. And that happened on November 12th. So we were basically, I think we operated 160 for 4 nights, and that was pretty much it. Next.
Go ahead.
The team was back on the air. The entire complement of us, the 4 of us, were on the air November 10th. And this was really the first day that we had no emergencies whatsoever. And a lot of us were feeling that it's crunch time. We've got 4 days left of operating. We've been down for a bulk of the time. And we basically had to sort of change our mindset. We went back to essentially every person running 12-hour shifts and just pretty much racing the clock. And here's Robin's back and with her mask on, and it's 85 degrees to 90 degrees every day, 100% humidity, and a lot of mosquitoes, lots of mice, lots of rats. I mean, it was very, very primitive location, but it was happy to, for us to getting back on the air. I think we were doing about 4,500 Qs a day between the 4 of us. And the other thing to remember is that Brian at night is remoting in. It's the daytime in Seattle, and he's able to help us with Qs. So it was really wonderful to have everyone on the team racing the clock, as they say.
And then on November 14th, it was time to pack up. We had to race the clock to do that because of more storms coming in. All our equipment was in disarray. It was important to get all the equipment as much as possible back into the same numbered bins as it arrived in, because we had inventory sheets used by the customs agents and they were going to check. And so it was quite a process that lasted from noon on the 14th to after dark. While the fellows were taking down antennas and putting away big equipment, I was under there doing my best with inventory sheets that Jack saved from the rain with my headlamp. And here's an example of some of the weather we had as we were trying to tap that. On the 15th, around 10 o'clock, CTSI came to pack up our equipment. We had to be there about 5 in the morning in order to just finish getting packed. We did have a chance then to walk down the hill into those beautiful stone monoliths briefly that I spoke about earlier. But getting up at 5 in the morning on the last day, when we had to be at the airport, our flight was at 3:25 a.m. on the 16th. So we get up, but there's no chance to go to bed again. So the equipment is packed up, it's gone. We leave M&A at around 4 o'clock. We visit Jonathan, the licensing agent. We went out to see a very special place. It was like our only real ability to sightsee, but we're trying to kind of kill time. And we found the Tokyo Rose World War II site, picture courtesy of someone who asked me to add it after a previous presentation. This is some photos I took of the bombed out building where Tokyo Rose 1, 2, 3, however many actual Tokyo Roses there were purportedly broadcast from. And you see the tower on the right, the rusted tower down on the ground. But we had to hike through quite an extensive field, picking our way through mud and water to get there. It was just really very interesting, though. We also managed to have dinner with Gary that night at a lovely restaurant in Karor, and we drove up to the Carolines Resort and realized we were very fortunate that didn't work out, because it just wouldn't have been a good place for us. A storm came in the night. We were traveling there that took out power for that island, but not Babel Daub. And the noise was probably bad. We probably never would have gotten on the air had we gone where we had originally planned. So finally, after almost 24 hours up, we made it to the airport and our flight. We had another long 25-hour flight, no overnight in Guam. Made it into Seattle. You see Brian second from the left, picked up a couple of us, and we were home. So the results of our DXpedition, we made about 30,000 contacts, almost 29,000 after removing duplicates, and of those, over 10,000 were unique stations. In other words, over 10,000 unique stations worked us. We worked at 102 different entities on 6 continents, and you can see the percentage of modes. FT8, as always, is 55%, CW almost 26%, SSB about 20%. And on the next slide, you can see how we did by band, and Rob will talk to this slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that of the 14 days that we plan to operate, we were on the air for 6.5 days. So those 30,000 cues were done in 6.5 days. Every other day was essentially problem solving. As you can see, our money bands were the upper bands, 10 meters, 15 meters, 12 meters would have been, I believe, just as high had we not had so many distractions. Again, the one point of interest is we've got 60 meters for the first time being activated from Palau, 334 contacts, and 160 was another really a successful story for us, given that we were only on for four nights. One of the stories that I'd like to say is I've got some friends in the UK, and they warned me that in the entire history of amateur radio, there were only ever 2 contacts with a UK station from Palau in the entire history of the amateur radio. And we did well over 30 on this trip. So we really put out a big signal, even given the noise running at S9 plus. And really, you can thank a mode called FT8 to give us those cues, because basically 60, 80, and 160 had S9 noise. I think I attempted to make some contacts on 80. I think we made about 90 or 93 CW contacts on 80, but it was like pulling teeth. It was really, really tough. So anyway, that was sort of the gist of our operation. It should be noted that we have 12 contacts on 2 meters. Justin and Jack did a little satellite effort, and so it was pretty fun to get a few cues in. I think it was primarily the Japanese. I don't think they hit any U.S. stations just because we were so far away. And then obviously we made a few cues on 6 meters as well.
I want to say thank you to all of our sponsors. DX Engineering was amazing, giving us 2,500 square feet of LMR 400 coax with all the connectors to go with it and the specialized crimpers. Step IR loans Rob the 2 big IRs we brought, and that was a wonderful contribution, as well as Arlen Communications, who gave us a great deal on our Radio Sport headsets, which, if you heard how noisy the generators could be, the storms could be, we could hear. There was no problem. I highly recommend Radio Sport headsets, and I own 3 of them now, and I take them everywhere. Also want to thank all the individual contributors to our project. QSLs are done through Tim M0URX in the UK. It's $5 for unlimited number of contacts. Out of that, $1.75 we have to pay to Tim. We also have PayPal costs, so a little under $3 of that has been used to defray our project costs, which include all our shipping of our equipment, which has turned out to be double what we originally thought, plus hiring of these invaluable construction crew and unexpected rentals of equipment such as generators. And so we really appreciate all the support we've gotten. We didn't actually go out looking for support because, we're new. We're not the big time DXpeditioners, and we didn't want to be too beholden. But as it turns out, we're very appreciative of every bit of support that we got. And that is the end of this presentation. You can see our emails if you wanted to contact any of us. I'll leave it up briefly, and then I will stop screen sharing, and we will be available for a while to answer any questions.